Hello everybody and welcome to episode 1 of the Pineapple DevOps Experiment podcast. I'm James and I'd like to take you through the first introductions of what DevOps is and what it means and basically what the meaning is of DevOps. Okay, let's start with what the name is. Okay, DevOps, Development Operations. Now what this means in the big world when you look at DevOps is it breaks it down into two sections. You have developers on the left and you have IT operations on the right. Now, what's happened for many, many years is that the developers, well, they always work in their own local machines. They get on with coding, they get on to building their apps, etc. And by the time it gets around to hosting it somewhere, putting it somewhere and getting an infrastructure around it to give it to the public, that's where IT operations come involved and start building the servers, start building all the constructs that's going to support those applications. Now, for many years, we've had problems, we had fights, the devs would throw it at us over in the operations world, and we would just have to cope and hope that things would work, and most of the time they didn't. So along came DevOps. Now, a little bit of history about myself, where I've come from, is I've been mostly an infrastructure engineer for many, many years, but I found myself working with developers every day. And with those developers, I found that they were constantly developing code and doing changes, and I found myself constantly banging my head against the wall with, why is it working on your machine, but it's not working on the server? And I'd go, we need to have a means to fix this. We need to have something that we can go through that's going to best, fix the problem. So what DevOps is all about here is fixing those problems. So let's take someone's code. Someone does the piece of coding on the development side, and we've got to get to the operations side on a server. Now, we've got two different platforms here. We've got a local machine that's been building and compressing this with different modules, and we have a server that's pretty much not been touched. It only gets used to host the environment. Now, depending on the complex side of that code that's being developed, obviously there needs to be things installed in that server beforehand. Now, 9 times out of 10, the developers are very good. They will always kind of put their modules into their package JSONs or wherever it's going to be to make sure that we understand exactly what should be installed. But that 1/10 of the time, yes, that 1/10 of the time, it's not always as clear. So we need to use third-party tools in between to interject, to build, to test, and to make sure we deliver into that operational space. Now, if you're staying ahead with me here, that's exactly what DevOps is. It's that small bit in between being a developer and being an IT operator, and making sure that you can pass that through seamlessly. The developers still exist and the operation guys still exist, but we exist in that space in between. Now, why it's very, very important now for the DevOps space over the last, many years now, where it exists and it's very important, is that you're not only taking the dev code, working with the developers to make sure they're thinking about everything they can to include so it's fit to move up into operational space, but also there's many other things we might want to do on the way up, where we don't want a developer to build out, let's say, 5 different versions of their code, one for their dev space, one for their testing, one for a user acceptance testing area, and one for production. That's just going to be too much work. So a developer has to only build one piece of code. That one piece of code they're going to be testing on their local in a dev space, and that one piece of code, obviously we have to now transform that into multiple versions that can be posted into the different environments. We still have to use the same code base, so we're just changing configurable items, and that's where DevOps really shines. We kind of build things within our what's called CI/CD, which I'll get to in a bit, continuous integration and continuous deployment, which will kind of work with pipelines to build, to test, and then release those into the said operations. So we're going to make things a lot easier for the IT guys at the other end who's just looking after the infrastructure. So if you think about from the old kind of ideas of IT, and trust me, I've been in this game long enough and been in the IT world myself, we've had many times where servers, they have a lot of things going on all the time. You have security updates, we've got DNS issues, we've got network security issues along with DNS issues. We've got lots of different gateways to think about. Maybe we've got VPNs. We've got whatever we need to do inside that networking space. We've got hardware. We've got on-prem solutions with different hardware kits, or we're dealing with different cloud environments, AWS, Azure, GCP, Oracle, all these different cloud platforms that require a level of expertise to be working with. So when you're dealing with operations, they've got a lot on their hands to deal with. And when you're dealing with developers, they're focused on building those apps. So again, that's where DevOps really comes in. DevOps tools and technologies that are being used are now assisting the development as well in that space. So you've got tools like Docker, Kubernetes, and Jenkins, Ansible, all these tools that we're using to configure those environments, be it infrastructure that we now configure and can deliver to the operations side, or if it's applications based on .NET websites or something like that, where we just want to work in a Git repository and have a proper release mechanism using management tools like Git. One big thing when it comes to all the tools that DevOps uses, and that word is automation. It's one of the key words that DevOps focuses on, and that's about removing the toil, the manual parts, and the labor-intensive areas of getting that code from A to B. So, as we said earlier, developers are compressing their code, developing it, exporting it out into a zip file or something, into a package or an asset of some sort that we're going to use to get into our servers or our cloud platform. Now, we don't want to copy and paste that. We don't manually configure every single file and configuration and web config, whatever's going to go in there so we can move it up. We need to be able to automate that journey. And that's when those tools and technologies that we're using will help us to automate that. We can make sure we can put parameters in place so the different variables in our code can be picked up for the different environments it's needed. And all that needs to be programmed in code. And that's when we start to look at coding and when we start to look at coding for ourselves. And this leads us down the path of infrastructure as code. Infrastructure as code is an area which has really kind of taken off over the last few years with tools like Terraform, where we can actually now start to build the infrastructure for the operation side as a piece of code that can be configured and that can be automatically deployed into each environment that is required. So we're now kind of helping that transition from a developer building something, telling us what they want. We can build out the infrastructure and we can build out whatever kind of automation is needed to then basically transform and deliver that across into the operational space. If you're keeping up to date with me here in this very, very short 10-minute podcast that I'm aiming to do, it is really just covering over some of the very basics of what DevOps is doing, from its CI/CD integration using pipelines, and we'll get to that probably in some more detail, infrastructure as code and how we're using it in day-to-day worlds. And then we can start moving further down the rabbit hole of DevOps to where we get to things like site reliability engineering, where we can monitor and create metrics around observabilities and making sure things are scalable. And then we have security as well in DevOps. And security is a big buzzword at the moment with DevSecOps. So there's plenty on the plate to talk about and to go into different discussion areas. You might be able to then start to see why I'm starting to call this podcast the Pineapple DevOps Experiment. Obviously, DevOps has multiple layers, it has multiple things connecting to it, and it has things you don't even see. Now, when you think from a pineapple point of view, right, you've got this very crusty out shell. It does not look tasty on the outside, but when you cut it open, it is. It's tasty, it's soft, it's juicy, but you can't eat its core. Its core is rigid and it's very strong. And then you've got these leaves on the top. I mean, yeah, it's probably there just to make it look fancy, and probably that's why we call it DevOps and not development operations. So when I'm trying to kind of use analogies here, and I'll be doing probably a few of these as we go, I want to kind of really connect with you and kind of make you think about what DevOps is doing. It's not just a fancy word that loads of tech people are jargoning it about everywhere and is very, very difficult to understand. If you have any idea of IT and you've worked in that space before, or even if you sit at home and you look at the computer and you're using day-to-day applications on the internet, I can help you to kind of use that knowledge to kind of move it into what DevOps is doing. Again, following on from this episode, this is only a first episode I've done, so this is me just talking off the top of my head here, nothing scripted. I want to go into areas of the cloud environment, so Azure space, AWS, GCP, and a couple of things that are more closer to my heart and my home on this DevOps space, which is things like site reliability engineering, and also things like DevSecOps, and looking around the security elements of DevOps and how we integrate that between the dev building their platforms out to us delivering those platforms into operational spaces and making sure we hit every security test and make sure it's fit for delivery, fit for purpose if you want to go down the IT management naming areas and things like that. Anyway, hope you stay tuned. This is only a quick one. Adios and see you next time.